Attention, Roofline guys, they came from Lisbon to present this. Aleksandar's thesis was about Cache-Aware Roofline. It entered Intel tools. Just for comparison, my mom did not read my thesis, and that's normal. That's normal. So it's great to have them here. They know what they're talking about. Thanks, Aleksandar. Thanks, Alexandre, and enjoy.
Yeah. So thanks for the introduction. So it's a big one, and he put really huge fuzz. It's not that complex, neither it's the best thing in the world. So first I'm Aleksandar. I'm gonna cover the part of the theory, and Alexandre is a member of our team who is actually doing stuff in the roofline and the tools. So I will be doing the theory part, and Alexandre will be joining in the second part, in which he will cover hands-on demo, and then you will see the tool actually working. So Alexandre, if you want, you can sit it to the problem, not to stand all the time. So regarding this part, I mean, it was a very good intro from Petar. So he actually saved some minutes of the presentation that ends up being very long. Okay, so I hope that I'm not going to shoot you with a lot of material, but feel free to stop. Feel free to ask questions. If you get lost, ask us, wave, we can repeat, because we do this for you, right? So it's like we assume we passed the slides before coming here, so we kind of know some part of it, but do shoot a question. If you feel lost, just say. We kind of also don't know, what is the level of the material we are teaching, so it might be too high or maybe too low, so that's why we get your feedback. For example, last night we got an email from very high profile guy, with years of experience in tools and profiling, saying, oh, I tried to install this and I couldn't follow your guide. And this is kind of a stuff because we thought it was clear for us, but when you work with something for so many times, you kind of just get it for granted. So please also fill the questionnaire. Your input is very valid for all of us to know how to tailor the course for the future editions. So, okay, let's start with the roofline thing. So basically the whole this motivation is, also Petar was saying, is that you don't only have heterogeneous memory, you have heterogeneous system whatsoever, which means apart from multi-core CPUs that are getting equipped, with very, very powerful compute units, you also get many different devices. So you have GPUs, you have FPGAs into play, you have now AI accelerators all around, and then what you want to do with them, you want to run your application faster. But then your applications do not also help, because they tend also to be heterogeneous, they tend to be very complex, and they have different requirements. Some of them require different type of devices, some of them will require a different approach for optimizations for running. And when you mix the complexity of the hardware with the software, there comes the pain. So that is the part that comes very hard to optimize and deal, not only in terms of the tools and programming languages and the support, is really you simply don't know where to start. And this is kind of the ground where you get a roofline. So it's not intended to be detailed. It's not intended to give you all possible answers. It's quite opposite. So it tends to abstract the complexity of both of these parts to a very high level so that you basically know where to start. And it's not going to give you all the answers, but it's going to give you hints. For example, you might ask yourself, it's like, okay, I'm optimizing this stuff, I'm running it in a system, but then I don't know how good I am. It's like, is where I'm now, is that the best I can get? Or how far away should I go to reach the maximum of these platforms? And this is kind of answers that Roofline might give you. And it will also give you certain hints. Okay, you're here, maybe from this point on, you should invest more in this type of optimizations or that type of optimizations, which is good because it's going to reduce your space in which you're going to optimize the stuff and the way how you look at the system as well. So how we're going to do it? I'm going to give you some boring part of the presentation, which is theory and pen and paper examples. And then the juice will actually come with Alexandre at the end of the talk in the second half, where you will see the tool in action and how you can optimize application even in Mare Nostrum 5. So from the basic part of the theory or how we start. So this is where Petar actually helped me. So as you know, this is like a high-level overview of a CPU nowadays. So you basically, what you have there, you have a set of, many cores. And each of them is a very powerful engine. So if you look to his integer add, or if you look to the floating point division, in fact, in nowadays cores, you don't do one. You can do several of them at the same time within a single clock cycle. And that is the trend that you will see nowadays in almost any architecture that you tackle, is they don't actually do one instruction. I mean, they do one instruction. They operate on more data at a single time, which means they become wider. And the problem is here inside the core, once you're inside the CPU, you can basically do whatever you like. It is very easy to scale. It's very easy to reach very high performance because here you have a clock. You process, 16 elements within a clock cycle, and that's like tremendous performance you can get. But the problem is you need to feed those cores with something in order to be able to reach that performance. And that is the part that Peter was showing with the DRAM. So if all your data would come from the DRAM, you probably wouldn't need so wide processors because they wouldn't have the data to crunch that fast. And because simply DRAM is far away, and as physics dictates, you need time to get the data. And apart from that, it is large and it's cheap, but it's not fast. And in order to actually bridge this distance, nowadays systems, all of them have certain levels of caches. And there are several levels of those. So it's like the L1 is the closest to the core, it's private, and it's the fastest, but it's the smallest. Then you have L2 that is also private for each core. It's just that bit further away. So it's a little bit slower, but you're still good. If you have your data there, you will be amazing. And it's a little bit bigger. And L3, or last level cache, is actually the one that is shared among all of the cores. It is not inside the core, it's just right behind them. And that allows all your cores to communicate between themselves. You're also not bad if you have data there, because still you don't have to go outside of the chip. So the trick is, if you want to have your application running fast, you either have your data somewhere close to the core, or do whatever you want with your application in order to have it there. If it is not there, your performance will tremendously suffer. And you will see some examples as we go and what we can do about it. So how they construct the cores nowadays is that you don't really issue a load and then you wait for it. Basically, your CPU is smart in a sense that he will find something else to do while waiting for that data. Which basically, if you think about it, if you manage to make your application in such a way that your data keeps coming in while you're computing, you're actually cool, because like this, you're overlapping your memory transfers with the computations that you're doing. And this is basically, the last thing I said is roofline. So whole idea about the roofline is that in your architecture, you can compute at the same time while you're transferring the data. And if you do those two operations at the same time, you can reason what is the major bottleneck. If you compute for longer time, you're compute bound, and you're fine, because memory is not a problem. But if you're spending more time transferring the data, then you will be memory bound, and you need to increase your compute in order to cover it. So the problem is actually the bandwidth, as we were saying. And there are two flavors of the roofline model that cover this part. So we have the Cache-Aware Roofline Model, and for that one, what we are looking at is the bandwidth as seen by the core, which means you have your application running, it issues loads and stores, you ask for the bytes, and then we really don't care where those bytes come from. So they can come from your L1, from L3, from DRAM, who cares? We're just looking to the total volume of traffic that goes and leaves the core. If you're fetching this data inefficiently from deeper memory, we'll see that in the time domain, which means you'll take more time to get it. As opposed to that, you have the original roofline model, and most papers that you will read nowadays will actually cite that paper and they will claim they use it, but you will actually see is that it's a total mess. So there are many people who are using one model or the other without actually knowing what they're using. And this is the part that we will also try to cover in this presentation so that you sense the difference. So there is no right or wrong roofline model. Both of them are right. They just give you different perspective how you analyze the codes. So bandwidth of CARM, or Cache-Aware Roofline Model, we just covered. What the ORM is doing, they look to the traffic between two memory levels, which means you go there, you don't have your data in L1, you will go and ask L2 if it has it. If it doesn't have it, you'll go to LLC. If you don't have it, you go to the DRAM. That means that for one application that you run, there will be some bytes moving between the cache levels. And those are the traffic that ORM is looking at, which is original roofline model. So basically, they will look to each of the data that is transferred between two memory levels. And like this, if you look, what are the repercussions is that in the Cache-Aware Roofline model, since you look to the bandwidth from a core perspective, there will be one model, and your application will be a single point. I will iterate more on this idea in a few slides after. If you look to the original roofline model, since they have bytes here, bytes here, bytes here, you will have several bytes happening at the same time, transferring between the levels, which means you'll get arithmetic intensity, or just think about bandwidth as for now, between each of them. That actually brings you one model for each level of hierarchy, which means you have one application characterized by several points at the same time. So it's multiple models with multiple points. And this is something you don't see in the papers, because simply all of them start from that perspective, but sometimes we mix it with this one, and then it's a whole lot of mess when you read the papers.
No, mess is the next presentation.
Okay, it doesn't matter, we all have a mess. It's a different kind of. So, right, so this one we got covered, but as I'm saying, I will go more in detail. As for now, I'll focus obviously on CARM because it's for me easier to explain, but I'll give you also a taste of original roofline model just in a few slides from now. So, like with any roofline model, you will have, obviously, x and y axis. They will be in a log-log scale, so which means it's not linear. Going from here to here, it's whole universe. And then what you have in the y-axis is the real performance. Typically, we focus on floating point operation, like maybe not really Petter's division. Maybe we would like multiplication and addition because they're working almost at the same speed as his addition in integer domain. But division is also totally fine. You can use it. And then this is performance in terms of how many stuff you can deliver per second. And what you have as an x-axis, you can reason about it is how this part that I was saying about the overlap in computations and communication, which means how much of flops you did per memory transfers that you consumed once you were running your application. And this is arithmetic intensity as flops per byte. Think about it. Flops are coming from these really cool units that you have in your CPU. And you are wide, you can deliver a lot of them per clock cycle. And you actually want to have a lot of flops. And you want to load too few of a data to use it at the maximum. So if your flops per byte are really huge, which means very high arithmetic intensity, you will be compute bound. And this is exactly what you see in the roofline model. So you have this horizontal roof, which is the maximum that your architecture can give you from the units. Higher than that you cannot get because they are built to deliver this amount of data per clock cycle. So there is no way you break it. And that's why it's roof. And horizontal actually tells you, okay, this is the performance that even if you do everything perfectly, you will be on this line. Of course, if you're not computing only, and if you have a lot of bytes to transfer per flop that you deliver, you will be memory bound, which means your arithmetic intensity will be now on this scale, more to the right or left, to depend how you see the slide. And how you can visualize it here are those set of diagonal roofs. And as we talked, going through the DRAM or getting your data from the DRAM is the worst place where you can get it if you're doing it constantly. And this is what you see here. So this diagonal line tells you what is the performance you can expect given the amount of flops per byte that you do if all your data would come from the DRAM to the core. Make sense? As you fetch your data from the cache levels closer to the core, they're closer, they're faster, you get more bandwidth. Obviously, they will reveal you more performance as you go. One thing you can notice that even if you have all your data in L1, but you don't have enough flops to do it, this would be your maximum. So there is no way you reach the peak performance of the architecture. You're good? So, again, this is model of architecture. So Roofline is an architectural model. It doesn't have to do anything with application. So what it shows you the maximums that your architecture, that your CPU can give you. Higher than that, you cannot get. In practice, whatever you do, you should never be able to break this roofline. And your point will never be here, whatever you do. Okay? So now, where is your application? Your application is a single dot in a model. So for example, these orange guys, those are your applications. And those applications, since you wrote it, they perform certain amount of transfers over the flops that you do. They will be a single point with a single arithmetic intensity. And the problem is how you get those rooflines and how you get this arithmetic intensity. So getting CARM rooflines is not easy. You need to have micro benchmarks, but we get you covered with that. Tracing your application is also not easy, and there are 3 ways you do it. You look to your code, and then you try to estimate it, and most of the people do that pen and paper example when they do the first order analysis. So for example, here I load 2 floats from A and B, and as you know, all of them will give me 4 bytes because those are 32 bits. Then I do 1 multiplication, 1 flop, floating point operation, and I store that, which is again more 4 bytes. This gives me 12 bytes in total that I communicate over a single flop. So 1 over 12 is my arithmetic intensity. And this is more or less what you see with this application here. Of course, there are 2 more ways how you do it, but they have increased difficulty. One is that you look to your assembly, and then you go there and then try to detect loads and store instructions and floating point instructions that you have to. I mean, good luck if you do it manually, but there are tools that do that for you, and typically we refer to them as dynamic binary instrumentation. They would actually kind of look to the amount of load and store instructions and flops that you do, and do that. After that, you can actually reverse engineer your arithmetic intensity. The third one is that you ask your CPU. So CPUs are equipped with hardware counters that at runtime will count certain events. And those events can be load and store instructions and floating point instructions. So then after your execution ends, your CPU will tell you, this is the amount of flops I delivered to you, and this is the amount of bytes that you traversed. Hence, you get your arithmetic intensity. So you can use any of those methods. They will work in the roofline. Of course, they will be more or less accurate because neither you have perfect counters, nor DBI will give you a perfect result, and certainly you'll definitely fail doing it manually because your compiler will make, again, some mess. And if you look to that, now how you analyze your code in the roofline and why roofline can maybe help you. So once you have your application in the roofline, once you position your point here, there are actually, oh, I didn't tell you, there are tools for this. You don't have to do anything of that manually. One of them is Intel Advisor. You have a roofline feature, and CARM is implemented there since 2017. We did, in fact, work with them, as Peter was saying. In fact, CARM is actually, I would say, byproduct of my PhD thesis. I never worked on my thesis, was not meant to be that. I was doing scheduling. And then we were doing some energy efficiency analysis, and by chance, we discovered that there is another way of doing roofline. And then we published a paper thinking nobody's going to pick up. But then, you know, a few years later, we got an email from Intel saying we read the paper. We were like, Intel reads papers, you know, but anyway. And we started working, and at the end, they did a pretty decent job. You can do all of that very nicely with very cool interface across all Intel CPUs, GPUs, and whatnot. But then it's just for Intel. And a few years ago, like 1 or 2, we started developing our own in-house CARM tool, which now gives you the same micro benchmarks that we developed back then. And now you also get support from Intel, from AMD, you get for ARM, also RISC-V, and we give you also a way how to profile your application, both based on counters and DBI, which is dynamic binary instrumentation. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Alexandre will show you actually the tool. So now let's go to the application. So once you have it in the CARM, the first thing you need to detect is the region where your application lies. And in CARM, you have 3 regions. One is that if your application is completely covered by diagonal slopes, then you will say that your application is memory bound. If your application is only covered by horizontal lines, then you're compute bound. We talked arithmetic intensity, flop per byte, this is where it comes from. And then you can also be in the middle, which means that your application is covered both by the bandwidth lines and by the horizontal roof, which actually tells you are in the mixed region. So why this matters is because the position of the point in the roofline and in the region will actually tell you what is the optimization strategy that you should actually try to tackle first. So if you're memory bound, it would make very little sense that you try optimizing your computations because they're not your problem. So if you're here, you would generally try to restructure your data accesses, find a better pattern, reuse your data, block it, do whatever you like, move your data closer to the caches. We'll talk about some strategies how you can do it, but definitely you should not invest in compute bound. If you're here, you would actually try to invest more in kind of strategies that will allow you to bump up your computation from a CPU point of view. Vectorize your code in order to be able to crunch more data per cycle, or parallelize your code if it was not parallelized. Remove divisions, you know, those long latency instructions. I mean, if you can, of course. If you're in a mixed region, here you're doomed. This is very hard to optimize because you have to switch between memory and compute optimizations. Why they're hard? And the problem is that many applications actually are in this region. So, how you guide your optimization? So, we talked application and you program it. And this is the code that you have. So it means you wrote and it will fetch certain amount of bytes and it do certain amount of flops. When you optimize your code, this is an intrinsic property of application. It is not expected that your application will change arithmetic intensity because that is what it is. It's application identity. Unless you go there and completely restructure your code, of course, it will be something else. And if it doesn't change it, how we say, you draw a vertical line at your arithmetic intensity, and then all the roof lines that you intersect on the way are your potential bottlenecks. Of course, you should focus on the roof lines that are close to your point. For example, this guy is very close to the DRAM, and it has some L3, so probably here we have some problem, okay? And then what you expect, as you're improving your application, it will retain the same flops and bytes if you don't change it. You will be performing the same amount of flops, but in less time. And that means that your performance will go higher. As the performance goes higher, you would expect these points actually to slide on the vertical line up until hitting the maximum roof that you have in the roof line, right? And this is your target. So you want to optimize until reaching the maximum that the architecture can give you. Of course, neither all application can do that. There are certain restrictions. Neither applications are that beautiful. But this kind of gives you an idea of where you are, how much should you affect. And for example, if your application is here, you can actually see how much of an effort do you need in order to reach the maximum. That's basically everything about roofline, how we construct, how we plot application, and how you analyze it. And now when we are here, let me show you the difference between CARM and OR, between Cache-Aware Roofline Model and the original Roofline Model. So let's do again. So now I have everything color-coded. So it might be easier, it might be more confusing. I don't know, you tell me at the end, okay? I just thought it's a clever idea to use different colors, okay? So you have your cores, and as I was saying, in the CARM, we will be looking to a single point of bandwidth. So it means traffic, I'm sorry, the bandwidth will be different. We look to the single point where you look to the bytes, which means as they leave the core. And then they can land anywhere you like, which means we still go there and create micro benchmarks, which are done in order to exercise certain cache level. I'm not going to go into detail. If you're interested, we can talk about that really a lot. But they're actually meant, you can think of it that we are forcing the benchmark to reuse all the data in L2, but evicting all previous levels in the hierarchy. Like this, you get L2 to the core bandwidth, L3 to the core, DRAM to the core bandwidth, and so on. In ORM, original roofline model, as I was saying, you look to the traffic between the levels. So how they construct, they just go open the data sheet, and then they say, here, this is my size of a lane that I have, times the clock frequency, and this is the maximum you get. The difference can be staggering. It's more or less what Peter was showing there when he was comparing the bandwidths of the system with or without Optane, is that you can get, let's say, with our measures more or less, I mean, this is just invented number for some CPU, around 400 gigabytes per second from L2 to the core, while your bandwidth between L2 and L1 is around 1 kilo or 1 terabyte per second, right? So it means the models look exactly the same. So when you put it in the paper, nobody will ask that, you know, and you can cite one or the other. The problem is how you analyze, okay? Of course, as you can also notice, the roofs are not the same. They just look the same, but they completely target different values. So where the difference comes? So let's do a pen and paper example, which is very simple, and I hope I'm not going to get you lost with this one. It's pretty simple, I promise you. So imagine I do n iterations in which I all the time do b bytes and f flops. So I do n iterations. Within every iteration, I do b bytes, f flops. I hit run, and I start my application. Your caches are cold, which means there is no data there for you. If there is no data, all your data has to come from DRAM. So in the very first iteration, all your b bytes that you ask will go to the DRAM. What happens there is that in that very first iteration, if you look to what happens between the caches, you will obviously not have in L1. So there will be b bytes transferred to L2, right? Then again, you'll miss in L2, there is nothing. So there will be b bytes transferred from L3 to L2. And your data is not also in L3, so there will be b bytes transferred from DRAM to L3. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So in CARM, you will just see b bytes, because that is what left the core, that is your request. They will come from DRAM, you know it because we just talked about it. Eventually you wouldn't know that. You want to see that in the roofline. Roofline should tell you that. If you look here, since between each of the levels of hierarchy you have b bytes, you will have several arithmetic intensity in the original roofline model, one for each level. And on top of those b bytes, you do f flops. So arithmetic intensity in CARM is f over b. If you look to ORM, for each level, L1, L2, and DRAM, you had f over b. And now the weird thing comes. If I plot that in the models, in CARM, you will have a single point that should land on top of your DRAM line because all your data came from DRAM. And this is a single point, and everything that we just talked how to analyze still holds. If you look to ORM, you end up having 4 points at exactly the same arithmetic intensity. And in ORM, in original roofline model, there is no notion of real performance. What they do, they pick up flops per byte and just intersect all the lines that you have here. So you have f over b intersecting DRAM line, f over b intersecting L3, L2, and L1. If it is confusing, I completely get you because it is. So how you analyze this? So that is where the difference comes also. So in CARM is what we were saying. So You start from here, you draw the vertical line, and you see what are your bottlenecks. I mean, here is a very obvious case that you're DRAM bound, and obviously you should do something in order to go to higher memory levels like L3 and so on. How you analyze in ORM, you look to the intersection points, and the point of minimum performance is your bottleneck. So as you can see, they intersect here the lines, and the DRAM is the minimum. So in this case, DRAM is your problem. Make sense? How the optimization works? In CARM, you will be optimizing application, as we were saying, and the point is supposed to move up. In OR, you focus on the first problem that you have, which is DRAM. As you start optimizing your application, imagine you can fit everything in L3. You will be reducing DRAM traffic. And when that happens, your points will start moving to the right. And this is weird, but this is actually what you will see in any ORM if you had ever used it. Your points, once you start optimizing, will start shifting to the right, and then, it may or may not make sense. If you use it properly, it would make definitely, okay? But there is no real performance. It's all the time sliding on the lines. Okay, and then, now I go second iteration, so I join first and second. What you actually have here is a different thing, is that in the first iteration, all of them missed, so all of them went to the DRAM, but in the second iteration, I have my data in LLC, in my last level cache. So in the second iteration, all my bytes will come from L3, and they will not be retained in L1 and L2. What happens in CARM? Now for both iterations, 1 and 2, you will be doing F over B, which makes 2F over 2B. And what happens in ORM, you will be having B bytes in both iterations between first 3 cache levels, L1, L2, and L3. But only in the first iteration, you will be transferring B bytes from the DRAM. In the second, you won't have it. And this is the switch that you get in arithmetic intensity. So your arithmetic intensity for L1, L2, and L3 will still stay the same, but your arithmetic for DRAM will start changing. And now when you plot it in CARM, since second iteration go from L3, the first was in DRAM, your performance will get higher because you start getting in the second the data from faster memory. In ORM, what you get is that your DRAM points start shifting to the right. Okay? Make sense? If I go, then the rest stays exactly the same. Optimization, you got it. You put vertical lines in both of the models, basically. You look to the point of minimum performance in ORM. So they say DRAM is a problem. Here you can actually see that it tells you that your point is limited by both DRAM and L3, which kind of you know because of the nature of the test. And now if I start putting more iterations, what you're going to observe is that if I go there and then put more, this doesn't work, okay. One more iteration, so I get from 1 to 3, my performance will start going up because I perform more iteration in L3, and as more iterations I'm doing, you will be compensating for the slow start in the DRAM up until you arrive to the L3 line. That is how you interpret in CARM. In ORM, your points will stay the same for L1, L2, and L3 because you will be all the time missing, and your DRAM points will start sliding. So if I add more iterations, for example, here, you will see that I'm hitting L3 line in CARM, and in ORM, you will start seeing points sliding and sliding over the DRAM line. If I put even more iterations, you will be here completely on top of L3 line, which, as I'm saying, due to the nature of the text, is something you would expect to see, while in ORM, you will become compute bound. Can you see that? And the reason why you do it is because you don't have so much DRAM traffic. Now all your traffic comes from L3, and in fact, it is true, but you should look to this point now, because this is the point of minimum performance, it's L3. And this is something that many people don't do. So they just saw the points shifting in DRAM and say, I'm done, it's optimized, it's compute bound. But it doesn't mean that you're compute bound just because your DRAM point went to the top. Of course, there are Frankenstein models that are actually mix both of them, And good luck analyzing that, because simply if you can actually see now how subtle difference in preserving, seeing the bandwidth differently can actually provoke completely different analysis even in a simple model as Roofline is. So now I just do something really fast and then I give the floor to Alexandre. So what we actually did is that, as I was saying, all major players nowadays are interested in Roofline because it's simple. I mean, there is no really other logic in that. It's not the best one, but it's easy to understand. So Intel invested a lot in their advisor tool. They support CARM natively, and they use dynamic binary instrumentation for application analysis. We got that covered at the beginning, which is instructions counting and stuff. AMD, UProf, they're actually implementing original Roofline model, and they're using counters, which means events in the architecture to profile your application. However, both of them are proprietary, vendor-specific tools, locked. You cannot touch anything. They just work on Intel or AMD. Then you have from academia open source tools, which is ERT, Empirical Roofline Toolkit. That actually is somewhere in between. So because the way how they get bandwidth lines, it uses applications, it's not really micro benchmark, not data sheets, and they don't have any support for application analysis. And this is kind of a gap that we wanted to cover with the CARM tool, which is, for this one, we give you a tool that covers all architectures like x86, Intel AMD, you get ARM, you have RISC-V. It gives you both ways of profiling the applications, DBI and the counters, and we also extend it to all of those vector extensions that we were talking. So you go, let's say, for Intel, from scalar SSC AVX2 to AVX512, which basically means wider and wider data that you can process. For ARM, we also cover Neon and SV, which is their kind of style of doing vector SIMD instructions. And in RISC-V, we perform both standards RVV07 and 10. Here, I'm just going to make a run through some slides because this is just advertising. They're not meant to teach you. So currently, what we are doing, we are obviously figuring out the interface and still making it perfect and benchmarking and stuff. So this is how the CPU tool looks like. And Alexandre will show you that in more detail. We are also working on the GPU extension. And for that one, we already have micro benchmarks and analysis for both CUDA cores and Tensor cores, as AI workloads and stuff like that. And we actually try now to parameterize and test what is the size of the matrices you should have in order to reach maximum performance, or what should be your filter size or number of channels for your convolutions in order to get the best performance in your GPUs. Then we also work with the BSC guys, here in order to integrate this CARM tool together with some other tools that you have. And we are currently in the final phases of having a deep integration with the Cache-Aware tool, which allows you to visualize the stuff. And then it has this magic feature, that you can go like, do these timestamps increasing and shrinking. And we managed to synchronize with CARM, so you can go see some part of your timeline of execution, and then in CARM, the points will also be moving and stuff. And finally, we also work with some dissemination using POP3 project and VHPS consortium of the tools in Europe. And currently, we are trying to deploy CARM in all major supercomputers in Europe. We managed to deploy it in Carolina, but then we got stuck. Now we are working to deploy it in all other parts once we figure out, the new version of microbenchmarking. Finally, in the scope of the DARE project, we are actually taking completely different direction. So here we start asking different questions. So what if I don't want to optimize my application, but I have a freedom to change my architecture? And then the idea in there was, can we use Roofline, or this kind of idea, to actually drive the design of the next generation HP processor in Europe? And with them, they have a set of workloads that they would like to run the best they can on the next GPP, like CODA-SIP. And currently, we are working with them in order to have this micro-benchmarking strategy and see what are the counters they need, how they can do it in order to have this coherent system with a Roofline-based architecture design. So, okay, the boring part is done. So now you have the link for the tool if you want to test it and things. I would like to welcome Alexandre now here for the demo. So.
I'm going to be presenting the CARM tool. So the introduction was already done, so I'm just going to gloss over it. We're a bit over time, so we have support for micro benchmark generation for a bunch of different architectures and their ISA extensions, vector instructions. We support application profiling through, for example, PAPI, which reads your performance counters, or DBI through Dynamo Rio. And we have a web-based interface where you can plot your applications and your roofs, which I'll also show. So, right, okay, there we go. So, I just have a quick script that I can run here. That's the wrong directory. Right, as I was saying, we have a web-based interface where you can, for example, here we have some of the architectures that we've profiled, and we can open, for example, Mare Nostrum 5, which a lot of you presumably are familiar with. And we can see here the roof line for it. You can pick the different ISAs and so on. So going back to the slides, which are here. Okay. Right. So let's take a look at an example application in Mare Nostrum. So we'll take a look at matrix multiplication. We'll look at something simple. We'll do single thread again for simplicity, and let's do double precision. So each element is going to be 8 bytes, and we'll have matrices that are square and that are 2K sized. So if we work out the size of our data set, we have around 96 megabytes, which if we compare it to the architecture, our L3 size is 225. So maybe we can use the L3 bandwidth. Let's see if that is the case. So in order to plot the applications, first I'll of course plot the correct roof, right? So scalar and single thread, there we go. Let's look at the exact implementation that we have, which is a very simple naive implementation at first. We're just going to take a row of A, a column of B, we're going to multiply the two, do the dot product, and we're going to stick that in the appropriate position in C. If we look at this, every iteration we're doing a load from A, a load from B, a store in C, so that's 24 bytes per iteration, and two operations, which are the multiplication and the addition. And now we can plot here the point. So we have a bunch of different applications here, and here is where our application landed. So we had 2 over 24 arithmetic intensity, right? So 2 operations, 24 bytes. That works out to 0.083, so that is correct. We measured the correct arithmetic intensity. That's the good news. The bad news is that our performance is really poor, where we would expect to be limited by the L3, but we're actually limited apparently by the DRAM. But that's because our implementation, it's very naive, it's very simple. And what's happening is when we're accessing B, we're jumping rows. So all of those big cache lines that we're getting from the L3, we're throwing all of that data out. We're just taking one element. And that's really bad. We can do a lot better. And so that tells us, maybe we should work towards getting contiguous memory accesses. And that's exactly what we do. We transpose the B matrix, right? So we rotate it. And now when we're accessing a column, we're essentially accessing what's the equivalent of a row in memory. This gives us, accesses to contiguous memory, which gives us a lot better cache locality. And all we had to do was to change the way we access B and some other aspects of our software. But we can see if that fixed our problem, right? So we can go transpose, and here's our new point. So we're between the DRAM and the L3 roof. So that tells us we're most likely limited by the L3 bandwidth. So that's good news. But we can still do better. I mean, if we look at the algorithm, we see that we reuse a lot of the data. We run through the same elements very frequently. And so what we can do is get even better cache locality by doing something that's called matrix blocking, right? So instead of working with the whole matrix, we're going to work in small blocks, and theoretically we can get the data from these blocks, from the L1, from the L2, from the upper cache levels. Those have better bandwidth, and so we should see a better performance. In this case, the block size that we chose, our data set size of the 3 blocks should be around 24 kilobytes, which is smaller than the L1. And if everything works right, we should see us limited by the L1. So let's see the blocked implementation. And indeed, we are between the L2 and the L1. So that's good news. We have a lot better performance. No, we're at 3.8 gigaflops. We were at 0.4. So that's a pretty big improvement, just solving the memory issues essentially. But we can do better. I mean, we're limited by the memory here. And really, I would prefer to be limited by the compute. And in this case, we can actually shift our arithmetic intensity of our application a little bit. We just have to tell the compiler that it can do some things that it's not doing. So, this keyword, the restrict keyword, very simple thing that you can add to your programs. If you didn't know about it, you're welcome. It's very, very simple and very powerful. It basically tells it no other pointer is going to access this pointer's data. So the compiler knows that when it writes in C, it doesn't have to go and load from A and B again because it can't assume that those values didn't change. And now it can assume. So now it can keep the data in the registers. And by keeping it in the registers, we are not necessarily loading it from memory again, right? And so if we implement the restrict keyword, we do see a shift in the arithmetic intensity. So we're doing less loads, the same flops, meaning our arithmetic intensity went right. Although our performance apparently did not increase too much. So that sort of tells me, maybe we're no longer really memory bound here. We're probably starting to see some effects of being compute bound. So let's also break through our compute roof. And we can do that in this case because we are using scalar instructions, but we can instead use vector instructions. We're not using everything the processor has to offer. Let's do AVX2 vectorization. This has vectors that are 256-bit wide. And instead of loading one element at a time, multiplying, adding, putting in C, we're going to load 4 at a time. We're going to multiply them 4 at a time as well. And then at the end of a row and column, we're just going to do something called the horizontal sum to get our final value that we put in the C matrix. You don't need to know all of the details, but we can see that our point does indeed break through the roof, but that's because we're not looking at the right roof anymore, right? So we were looking at the scalar roof. Let's compare and look at the AVX2 single thread roof. And there we go. We see that the point is now here compared to the correct roof, right? We had a performance that was 12 gigaflops. It's now 48, so that's 4 times higher, exactly what we would expect. And our point seems to be in the compute bound section, so at least assuming all our data is coming from the L1. But we can go even further. So let's see. Let me just put the correct plot here. So AVX2 single thread. Okay, there we go. But again, we can go further. AVX2 is again not everything the processor has to offer. There's even AVX512 in Mare Nostrum. Your computer might not have it, but these server chips do, which implements a ton of different very intelligent optimizations. It does register blocking, microkernels. You don't need to know all the details, but essentially it's a very well developed implementation, and we can see where it lands, right? So let's take a look at AVX512 roof, which is twice as performant as what we saw. So we had 256-bit vectors. Now we have 512, and we can see where the point lands. Let's just move the roof over here. There we go. And we can add the point, the final, there we go, the open blast implementation. And we're right by the fuse multiply add compute roof. That's good news. We're using pretty much everything that the architecture can offer. If we could optimize this, it would only be by a handful of %, and we got pretty much all that we could. So to recap, so if you are memory bound in the context of the CARM, you probably wish to improve your data locality. This will allow you to use higher memory levels and have a higher effective bandwidth. And if you can reduce any redundant loads your application might have, you can increase your arithmetic intensity and become compute bound instead. And that's exactly what it did, right? So through blocking and transposition, we could use the higher caches and get much more bandwidth. And through register reuse, we turned our application all the way from memory bound to compute bound. And if you're compute bound, if you have not yet vectorized your code, you can optimize it, you can vectorize it, you can achieve a much higher peak performance. And overall, we saw a speed up. This was just a single core, right? We didn't even used multiple cores for this, we got a 166 times speed up, mostly from the memory optimization side of things. We can see another type of application. So in this case, we're going to take a look at the stream benchmark. You're going to see more of it today. But essentially, it has four simple kernels. Copy kernel, copies from A to C. The others, I think, are pretty self-explanatory. I'll just go through them quickly. But we can see that copy doesn't do any operations. So it's kind of hard to model in the CARM since the arithmetic intensity would be 0. So it would be in minus infinity on the x-axis. So let's just remove that one for now, and we'll analyze the other three. We see that they have different arithmetic intensities because they operate on different numbers of bytes and perform different operations. And other than that, we're going to run this with 56 threads, and we're going to do 100 million elements per array, which is at least 800 megabytes, which is much bigger than our L3. So I would expect this to be possibly in the DRAM roof. Let's see if that is the case. So we'll remove our points here, and we'll go to the correct roof, which actually happens to be the AVX512 56 thread roof, because the code is so simple that the compiler can essentially automatically vectorize it for you. So we're going to get the 3 points here, and we see that they fall on the DRAM line as you would expect. And so let's think about this. Let's see, how would we improve this application on this architecture? Can we improve locality to use the caches? I mean, there's no real data reuse, right? So we run through the data once. We can't really use the cache in that case. And the memory accesses are already contiguous. So we're not throwing any data out. We can't really go that way. We can't also reduce any redundant loads because there aren't any. The code is quite simple, right? And so we can't really optimize the software on this architecture. So let's do the next best thing. Let's take our wallet out and let's upgrade the hardware. And Mare Nostrum has other options beyond what we see here. We can quickly go to a comparison between the different nodes. So here, the black roof that you see here is the original one that we were working on. And it's a bit of a mess of lines, but just focus mostly on the DRAM roof, which is this one and this one. And we can see that the DRAM roof for the HBM nodes, which is one of the ones you have available, has 4 times the DRAM bandwidth. So maybe if we can move our application to this architecture, we'll also see 4 times the performance increase. And so if we go up here, select the HBM roof exclusively, and go AVX512, 56 threads, and I'm just going to plot all of them here. And the bottom ones that you see here are the old points on the previous architecture, and you see the new points fall right on the DRAM roof. And indeed, we have a speed up of approximately 4 times. We increased the bandwidth 4 times, we see 4 times the performance. That's good news. And so, on the software side of things, the CARM tool allows you to easily identify which bottleneck is at play and gives you an idea of how to solve it. So if you can profile your application and you have your architecture's roof, you get really powerful hints towards optimizing it. And on the hardware side of things, even if you can't optimize your application, you can easily visualize the performance of different platforms. And if you know your arithmetic intensity, you know more or less what performance you can expect. I also have a quick demonstration for the guys that work with Paravert. So I can quickly show you the Paravert CARM integration. Okay, let me just start from the start. Yeah, so if you are familiar with Paravert, you know that you can open a trace and load a configuration, which is what I'm doing here. And yeah, so this opens up the different windows that you can visualize different aspects of your trace. For example, I have one for arithmetic intensity, one for floating point operations, and finally this one isolates just the AVX512 instructions, and we can right-click that and run the CARM on this final trace. There's a couple of options. So that opens up a new window which we can focus on, and there's a couple of options. One of which is use window colors, which is essentially going to mean the CARM is going to use the same colors as Paraver, and also use semantic window, which is going to restrict the points we see on the CARM to the ones we see on this trace. That opens up the link that you can again use to go to the web application, and we can open up the Mare Nostrum 5. So here I'm just matching the timestamp range to the one that we also have in this semantic window, and we can see points that reveal we have AVX 512 flops, which corresponds to what we see on the Paraver window as well. We can also select a smaller subset of points and then synchronize from Paraver, which is going to automatically select the equivalent range of timestamps in the CARM to look at just those points. Here I'm going from the semantic window to all of the points, so we can see everything beyond what we just see in the window. And we can see points that don't fit the window, and those are just colored in black, since they don't correspond to the filters we have here. Going further, we can change from the Paraver colors to the CARM colors, and we can characterize the points in different ways. So here they're just colored based on their timestamps, but we can also change it and, for example, color the points based on your thread IDs. So if you are working on multi-threaded code, you can see which threads, if they differ in terms of their performance, you can easily identify if some threads are memory bound, some are compute bound, and so on. You can also color them based on their vectorizer, and here we can identify the points that were previously in black. Apparently these are scalar. There's also some purple points which are SSE, green is AVX2, and finally blue shares the same color with Paraver, are the AVX 512 instructions. We can also transfer data from CARM to Paraver, so we can create a CSV file that labels the points based on under which roof they are. And we can open this in Paraver, and we can see which parts of the trace are under the DRAM, which are under the L2, the L1, and all of the different cache levels. Yeah, that is it for the CARM and Paraver integration.
Cool. Thanks, Alexandre. Thanks. Don't break the mic.
There we go.
Okay, so coffee break, half an hour. See you here. 12:10, we will open the room. You can leave your stuff, the room will be locked. 12:10, we open it. 12:15, we start the new lecture. We will shrink lunch break by 15 minutes, but we are good. Again, it was maybe too dense for some of you. That's okay. If you don't care about this, ignore it, right? If you do care about this, you have the material, you will have the recording, you can go over this again and slowly. Give it time it takes. Thank you. Vertex Garden, coffee, sugar, and oxygen. See you in half an hour.